I've been thinking about loss because everywhere I've been going in the last several days, people have been really stressed, unhappy, restless, bored, craving sociability, craving human contact. It's like they were okay when they considered that COVID-19 might be 3 or 4 months of sequester and inconvenience and anxiety about getting sick. But now it's begun to sink in that it could well go through to the end of next year before things return to a kind of normal. And within that framework of the loss of our everyday reality, our habitual reality, life just keeps chugging along. Somebody was killed in an automobile accident. Other people have cancer. Other people's kids are having trouble. My daughter's just made her 11th move in her marriage. It's kind of an overload. So in such conditions and situations, a lot of people turn to spiritual practice, thinking it's going to save them, thinking that awakening or enlightenment is going to be a fence they jump over. And once on the other side, they'll be home free. And they'll never feel anything again. I don't know why anyone would want to do that or think of wisdom in that way, but it's a common aspiration. I mean, something like that led me to use heroin for far too long. Just wanting everything to go away and to calm down and give me a break. So the question is, what can we do? What can we expect? And how can Zen help us? There's a wonderful old adage about an ancient eternal hermit who lives in a weathered old gray hut. And Zen practice urges us to meet him or her. And part of that tradition, part of the Zen tradition, is understanding that the I of the one speaking is not different from the I of the one listening. And that I lives in this sack of flesh. But it's still not different. And working on that puzzle through meditation and practice and close observation offers a kind of escape hatch from being attached to the suffering that we feel. There's no escape from it. The first noble truth of the Buddha is suffering exists. It's not neurotic. It's not a failure of consciousness. It's not a secondary state. It's our actual reality. Just like delusion is our actual reality. And we sit zazen with it. We sit zazen in the midst of delusion. We sit zazen in the midst of suffering. So you might ask, if nothing helps, why bother? Why go through the effort? Well, I didn't say nothing helps. I said the world is the world, and it's out of our control. And most of the time, we're able to filter out the suffering of others. It's going on constantly. We see indications of it. Black men and women being killed doing ordinary daily tasks. We read about slaves in Saudi Arabia. We read about stranded Filipino workers starving and out of work in Bahrain. People are suffering everywhere. And we don't somehow wake up to it until it hits us. I have a recurring nightmare. Some of you have seen my dogs, Pablo and Chico. And they're such partners. I got them together from the pound. And they were such beautiful roommates. They played without any status differentiation. There was no alpha. They were just like one pretzel. And they're always together. They're always sleeping side by side. They're on my bed side by side, sometimes squeezing me half out of it. And I have a recurring nightmare that one of them dies. And I'm trying to figure out a way to explain to the other one what happened. It's an awful feeling. For that same kind of feeling, I never put my dogs in a kennel. I looked and looked and looked until I found somebody who would come to my house and live with my dogs when I had to travel. And there's something about that inability to explain or inability to put complex problems that are larger than we are into language that makes the idea of offering comfort sometimes seem so remote. But to me, the first comfort is that it endorses our humanity. It's when we actually suffer, our nervous system is sharpened, and we can really feel the suffering of the world, the suffering of other species, the earth begging for water, plants begging for water. It makes us part of all of it. We may not like it. It may not be the kind of bliss that we were hoping for, but it is reality. It has the salt and the tang and the bitterness of real life. And it's within that sweetness is measured. Or in contrast to it, or in the total changeability of it, that we notice the bitter and the sweet. And the problem is that little self-important ego just runs like a gerbil toward what it likes and runs like a gerbil away from what it doesn't like. And we're stuck. We're caught for the ride unless we have some kind of practice that allows us to see that it's all one thing, outside of our mind, outside of our explanations, outside of our concepts. It's all always been here. The rabbit doesn't begrudge the owl for killing and eating it. They're both playing a role. And as humans, sometimes we're the hero, sometimes we're the idiot, sometimes we're the victim, sometimes we're the persecutor. And Zazen helps us develop the courage to see things as they are. We don't have to like them. And very often, we indicate that we don't like it. Buddhists usually do that by sitting zazen in front of a nuclear power plant. Or Quang Duc, the monk in Vietnam who first burned himself alive. Other people shout in the streets and wave signs. And there's a fine line between accepting that this is the way things are and acquiescing to this is the way things are. I don't think it's necessary to acquiesce, especially when someone or some group or some species is receiving undue suffering. Someone is punching their ticket and taking the profits. I don't think we have to acquiesce. But we have to understand that everything that exists in this moment exists because of the prior moment. And everything that existed in that moment exists because of the prior moment. And the roots of anything, Donald Trump, go way, way, way back. His great-grandfather was running brothels in the gold rush. Way, way back, this line of self-serving has been going in that family. And so to change anything, to affect anything that involves human beings, we have to change people's minds. And it's very, very useful, practically useful, to understand that the I of the one talking is the same I as the one listening. Because if we understand that, we don't stand outside. We don't pretend to be different. We don't pretend to not have the qualities of those we're criticizing. And when we do that, something happens. People understand that they are in relationship. They may not agree with you, but they can feel when they're being judged or condescended or put down. And when that happens, they get immediately armored and there is no discourse. Just turn on the news. People take entrenched positions, they choose sides, and they go at it. It's because they don't understand that the I of the one talking is the I of the one listening. That's sort of the gate of Zazen. And then you come back from that to be in the world. Because what good is that insight if it's just yours? My teacher once said to me, if you're not being kind and helpful, who cares what your spiritual experiences are? Wow, Buddha came down, he gave me roses, and my Zazen must be so perfect. Who does that help? Somebody wrote to me and said, you really distract me when you touch your beard. So I've tried not to do that today, but I have to scratch my nose. My apologies. So what is loss? Loss is an attachment to something, or it's the byproduct of an attachment to something. It's the price of a ticket into the kingdom of love. We don't mourn the death of an ant usually, or a spider. Occasionally we get a shock when we find a dead bird in front of our window. At least it shocks me whenever I find that, and suddenly I have a pang for that little creature. Or when I see a bee drowning in the little water dish I have out, I can grab it and help it. So we come to an expectation that the life we want is the life we should expect and the life we deserve. As if somehow, because we're such estimable people, we can be exempted from the consequences of the universe. Zazen helps us see things as they really are. And I'm not suggesting that we should be detached and just watch the movies in our minds, because that would be only half alive, because we also inhabit these flesh bags. And they're full of feelings and sensations and rumblings and grumblings. That's part of our life. We're supposed to be with all of it. There's a famous story of a woman in ancient times, in the times of the Buddha's life. I'm sure everyone knows this, but just in case. And she was walking around carrying her dead baby, and she was in such grief she couldn't put her baby down. And she came to the Buddha, and she said, help me, please. I'm just suffering to such a degree I can't stand it. And the Buddha said, okay, put your baby down. I want you to visit every house in the city, in the town, and I want you to collect a mustard seed from any house where death has not visited. And he sent her off. Well, we can predict the end of the story. So Buddha didn't touch her forehead and push the magic light into her brain and light her up like a bulb. He told her the absolute truth. Because the absolute truth would do more to save her by bringing her into the actual world that she was living in. Then she could experience her grief, and she could burn it to ash. And when it's burned up, it's gone. Life's not a Hallmark card, and we know that. But somehow, when it comes to us, when grief touches us through someone we know, and we're reminded that this body goes, it's unnerving. The body doesn't want to die, even though I suspect it knows how to die. Animals know how to die. I used to hunt, and you could see when an animal was dying. It just resigned itself. There was no way out, and it resigned itself, and it died. And our bodies have been dying for hundreds of thousands of years. I suspect they know how to do it. But we don't want to. We have things pending. We have things we want to do. So there's no way to run away from loss. There's no way to run away from the pain in your knees when you sit zazen for a long, long time. The only thing you can do is confront it, become intimate with it, start to take it apart, start to pull the warp and the weft apart, put light in it, find the places where the dye is heavier than in other places, find the actual qualities of it. What is the taste of your suffering? And when you do that, something changes. It's the flight, the pushing it away, the suppressing it, that somehow increases the suffering. But to really understand that this is the world, clouds are going to cover the sun, it's going to be freezing cold, it's going to be super hot, all these things are going to happen. And those are all the price tags for being alive and being human. I'm not for a minute suggesting this isn't an extraordinary time. And I'm not for a minute suggesting that what people are dealing with is not highly unusual. You know, should your child get on a plane and come visit, are you safe? These are not questions that people have had to deal with. Why can't my friends come over, Mom? Why can't I go out? Some of the kids can go out. You know, in their teens, children are beginning to leave their families, and they're developing social groups which prepare them for that. And now millions of kids are having that genetic proclivity cut off. They can't go to school. They sit in front of a television and they get their schooling, and they're not getting that socialization. We don't know the damage that's going to do, but we do know the suffering that it's causing. And parents all over are stepping up and trying to find compensations and trying to help. And so one bright side might be an expanding intimacy in families. But that doesn't mean that the shadow of what our children are being deprived of is going to disappear. The children of the best parents are going to have some consequences of this, which stem from events that go way, way, way back. So I will say the only foolproof palliative I know to my own suffering, it's going to sound cheesy, I apologize, but it's not cheesy, is to help someone else. To find someone who's suffering and put your attention on them. Take it off yourself and help them. The Dalai Lama has a description of turning suffering into a dagger, the suffering of the world into a dagger, and to plunge it into the black spider of egotism that's in the center of your heart. That's some heady stuff. It's hard to admit all the suffering of the world. It's scary. But if it helps you turn out like the Dalai Lama, it might just be worth the risk. So we're all bound by this sense of loss. We're all bound by existing in this time together. And when we pass one another on the street, in some way our nervous systems have been sandpapered. So we can just look at each other and go, and we know what we mean. There was a famous story I heard when I was a kid. When I was a child, the footage of the release of victims from the concentration camps in Germany were being shown on early television. Grainy black and white images of bodies being pushed into mass graves, arms and legs flashing like some ghostly ballet. It was really disturbing. My parents were visibly upset. They had lost a number of relatives. And some years later, I overheard two old people who were survivors telling a joke. And the joke was, two old Jewish women were on the train to Auschwitz. And one of them goes, ah. And the other one goes, you're telling me? Well, that's how it feels now. It feels like we're all suffering. And because of that, we can look at anyone on the street and we know that they're facing loss. We know that we're bonded by that loss. And that loss is actually our humanity. We understand them on a really deep level. It's not just a black guy in a hood that looks scary. It's not just Mike Tyson behind you in pink curlers at the ATM machine. It's people who are really suffering. And I can't think of a better moment in which to practice kindness, to practice forbearance, to practice compassion, to remember that the eye of the observer is the eye of the observed. If we don't know that, we're killing and burying the Buddha. The eye of the talker is the eye of the listener. If we don't know that, we're killing and burying the Buddha. I think that's enough for today. I'm going to say the metta prayer. May all beings be filled with loving kindness. May all beings be free from suffering. May all beings be happy and at peace. May all beings be filled with loving kindness. May all beings be free from suffering. May all beings be happy and at peace. May all beings be filled with loving kindness. May all beings be free from suffering. May all beings be happy and at peace.